No notices of motion. And on to item 8, the Resource Management Reform, Natural and Built Environment Bill and Spatial Planning Bill. We have Karen and Amber will come up. Thank you very much. Maybe you just want to introduce yourselves and your roles and the what we are debating today on this agenda item. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou, kua hui hui mai nei. E mihi ana ki ngā mana whenua o Tāmaki Makaurau. Ko Amber Dunn tuku ingoa, no te tai rāwhiti ahau. Ko te aitanga hauati, te whānau apanui, nai tā manuhiri te iwi. E mahi ana au hei Principal Strategic Advisor, Strategic Advice Unit o Te Kaunihera o Tāmaki Makaurau. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings to everybody that is here today. I acknowledge the mana whenua of Tāmaki Makaurau. I am Amber Dunn, a Principal Strategic Advisor with the Strategic Advice Unit. I am from the coast upon which the sun shines, Te Tairāwhiti and Gisborne. Myself and Karen Kirk are leading Auckland Council's response on the resource management system reform. Karen is leading on the spatial planning bill and I'm leading on the natural and built environment bill. This reform is a substantial matter. We've got 806 pages in the natural and built environment bill and we have 58 pages in the spatial planning bill. So I just want to say tēnā koe to His Worship the Mayor and tēnā koe to the Chair, Councillor Hills. This is a substantial reform to the way that we do environmental protection. These two bills, the spatial planning bill and the natural and built environment bill, together cover environmental protection, land use planning, and how we enable growth and development. Our presentation is a really condensed version of this 864 pages. And in it, we want to cover the key parts of the new system, the main shifts or changes that we see, and any issues and impacts or significant shifts for Auckland Council that have been identified to date.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Karen Kirk tōku ingoa. I'm also a Principal Strategic Advisor in the Strategic Advice Unit. Basically today we're seeking approval to prepare a submission to the Government, or the Select Committee in this case, and we're also looking for delegated approval to sign off the final submission, given that we have really tight timeframes. The deadline for submissions is the 30th of January, which also happens to be Auckland Anniversary Day. However, I'm pleased to say the Chair has requested an extension from the Chair of the Select Committee. If we move on to the next slide. Oh, can I do it? I don't know how to do it. So as Amber said, this is quite a substantial piece of legislation. Basically, the Government is looking to repeal the current Resource Management Act and replace it with 3 new acts, a Natural and Built Environment Act, a Spatial Planning Act and a Climate Adaptation Act. Now, the Climate Adaptation Act is on a slower pace. We're not expecting to see that until mid-2023. However, the Government has introduced the Natural and Built Environment Bill and the Spatial Planning Bill to Parliament, and it's been referred to the Environment Select Committee, who are now seeking submissions. This has been quite a long journey. It began with the Randerson's panel review in 2019. They made a series of recommendations that have largely been adopted by the Government. The Government released a very short first draft of the Natural and Built Environment Bill in 2021, but a lot of the detail was missing and we noted that in our Council submission. So we now have an opportunity to comment on those matters now. And then late last year, Ministry for the Environment released a discussion document on the key components of the new resource management system. and the feedback was intended to inform the current bills. I should say Council made quite extensive submissions on each of these reports and bills, and these are available on Kotahi. This just gives a brief overview of how the new system is intended to work. Basically, the two bills are designed to act in tandem. The Natural and Built Environment Bill introduces a new national planning framework, which will basically consolidate all the existing national policy statements and national environmental standards into the one document. But we're also looking at new chapters on new topics. For example, we know they're preparing one on infrastructure, and we're expecting some content on natural hazards. We'll probably see that in 2024. Basically, the Natural and Built Environment Plan is a new plan, and it will replace the current Auckland Unitary Plan, but over time. Basically, the Natural and Built Environment Plan and the new Regional Spatial Strategy will be developed by a new Regional Planning Committee. And this is a key difference with the current situation. Basically, plans won't be developed by Council, but Council and iwi will have representatives on that joint Regional Planning Committee. The Spatial Planning Bill introduces a new requirement for a regional spatial strategy. This will replace the current Auckland Plan 2050 over time, which also incorporates the development strategy. These spatial strategies will be supported by new implementation plans and optional implementation agreements, and both are non-binding. And basically, the government aims to simplify the system by having one regional spatial strategy and one NBE plan per region. But as I said, we've already got the Auckland Plan and the Auckland Unitary Plan. It's also seeking to strengthen legal linkages between plans, and this is something Council has supported in the past. I'll now pass on to Amber, who will talk about some of the key shifts and implications for Council.
Yes, we've got 6 key shifts that we're seeing in the new system. Karen's already mentioned the regional planning committees. Essentially, they are going to become the stewards of the plan-making process. They will be made up of local government representatives and iwi hapu members. Their essential role is to develop the regional spatial strategies and the natural and built environment plans. They're essentially a new independent statutory body, and they will be hosted by Auckland Council, and Auckland Council will be required to fund them. The 2 key matters that we've identified in the new system is that when we shift plan making to another entity, we're separating it from the funding and financing of what's in those plans. And it is vital that we ensure that Auckland Council is able to fund and deliver the projects in the regional spatial strategy, which will have priority actions. It's really important that we connect up plan making with funding and financing. The other key shift is what they're calling positive outcomes. This system is aiming to achieve positive outcomes while managing effects. Under the current Resource Management Act, it's mainly about managing effects. So this is a positive shift that we see. These outcomes need to be provided for when we're making decisions. That's the Regional Planning Committee has to take them into account, as does the consenting stage. There are 9 outcomes specified in the Act, and there is no hierarchy associated with these outcomes. Managing conflicts between them when there is no hierarchy is an issue that we have identified. The third significant shift is the introduction of environmental limits and targets. Environmental limits are to protect further degradation of the natural environment and also to protect human health. They are to be set in the National Planning Framework or they can be set in plans. The shift in the system is that when you're undertaking an activity, it must comply with these limits. As already mentioned, the National Planning Framework. This is now one integrated national policy framework, and essentially it is replacing all of the existing national policy instruments in the RMA. So your national policy statements, your natural environmental standards, they are all now being rolled up into what they're calling the Natural Planning Framework. The good news is this is the responsibility of central government. They will have to form it and create it and maintain it. The bad news is it's going to be rolled out in stages. We do not know the full content of this National Planning Framework yet. But it is going to be very important because it will also contain information about resolving conflicts, particularly conflicts relating to outcomes, and it also provides direction on achieving outcomes. Karen, the fifth shift there is what we're calling the regional spatial strategies and the natural and built environment plans, the key components of the new system. As Karen mentioned, they will replace the existing plans that Auckland Council already has. The shift in the system here is when you combine the National Planning Framework and the Natural and Built Environment Plan, there is greater front-end clarity for users of the system. What this means is there's more direction on how to achieve outcomes, there's more direction on what needs to be in a consent, there's more direction on what a permitted consent is. What this means is at the user end, it'll be cheaper and simpler. What that also means is the planning stage is more intense and costly for council, but it means it'll be cheaper for the users at the other end. The other key point there is that these plans will be made by an independent body, but Auckland Council will be required to implement them. So there's a separation there again. And lastly, consenting is still a main component of the new system. So is compliance monitoring and enforcement. This new system has a more permissive consenting regime. There are more activities going to be defined as permitted, and they will require a simple approval. There's also a proportionate process introduced, which means that the information that's required in consents is proportionate to the scale and significance of the activity that's been undertaken. On the positive side, there is enhanced cost recovery mechanisms for council. We will now be able to get cost recovery for monitoring and enforcement and investigations of consents.
So this slide basically just summarises implications for council and our role in the new system. So as we've said, local authorities will be represented on this regional planning committee. So those representatives will have a role in developing the plans and strategies. But the accountability mechanisms back to council are relatively weak. And also council will be a key party to these implementation plans and agreements through our role in processing consents, but also we're expected to fund prioritised actions in implementation plans through the long-term plan process. And then the final slide is just to give you an idea of the transition arrangements. Basically, the transition is expected to take 10 years. And the government has said that strategies and plans will be developed in tranches. So there'll be a group of, say, 3 councils who will begin work first, followed by another group of councils. We don't know the phasing of that yet. But we could see regional spatial strategy development beginning in 2025 through to 2029. That would be followed by natural and built environment plan development a bit later. So it could coincide with council's plans review processes. So we're hoping it won't be too onerous. However, there will be a phase where we're operating the two systems, and that could have some implications in terms of workload and costs on council. So as we said, we're looking for initial feedback from elected members. You can email feedback directly to us before Christmas, but there will be another opportunity after Christmas to review a draft submission, and hopefully we'll get the extension, and perhaps we can have a bit of a workshop next year, but we'll defer to the chair on that. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Amber and Karen. Now, members, do we have questions? I have the first from member Henare.
Kia ora. Just as a matter of a point of administration, on most of, in fact, all of the items that call for a joint committee, can I suggest that what we do is, because we have to take that back to our board, that we have a whole list of what you want us on at every monthly meeting, and we'll shunt it out so we don't take up too much time during the morning. The question, a couple of questions that I have, other than sending a message to iwi about basically saying you can now make a submission, what else, what's the other engagement going to be, or what has it been?
We have sought input from mana whenua as well into our submission, if they so wish to. We have included, we have a member of the IMSB as part of our technical project team as well. Those are the two main avenues we have in place at the moment.
And you know that IMSB will always reserve the right to make its own submission as well as assisting council. Cool.
I can also add that Ministry for the Environment has been engaging directly with mana whenua throughout the process. So in a way, council doesn't have to lead this process, but we have invited mana whenua input into our submission, or they can choose to make their own submission directly to the Crown.
Good, thank you. Councillor Walker.
So just got a few questions. Can you refresh me around, one, what the unitary plan cost us, and two, what the Auckland plan cost us, both of which are being superseded by this? I'm assuming, you know, within the nearest million is fine.
Yeah.
Through the chair, I was going to say millions, certainly in terms of the unitary plan. So unless my colleagues are going to tell me, it was absolutely in the millions, because that's both, you know, technical work, but also the hearing submission process. And when you add appeals, which.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think
understand
that.
I'm actually just after a number. Let's start off maybe closer to 10 million, in 10 million increments, but can we have some ballpark
I'll
idea?
need to come back to you. I don't have it on the top of my head.
Okay, so that's the unitary plan and the Auckland plan. Right. The other question I've got, quite obviously, there's some requirement for us to input around this. Without wanting to expand on it too much at this point, I would like to know how this will actually work, how it will work.
This is radical.
Please, I agree. I'd also like to know what degree of accountability there will be on the part of, let's say, people in Auckland around this mechanism, because they are being shifted further away. Now, I don't need that answer now, but I would like that, at least in summary form. In respect of two questions that you could probably answer right now, my understanding is that these bills strip away amenity, largely. Is that correct?
Correct?
Okay. And in respect of the intensification that is occurring across Auckland and the huge loss of urban tree cover, particularly mature trees, that neither of these bills do anything to advance protection at this point, and that issue has been put off. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yeah, in terms of the trees, the previous council advocated strongly to the ministry and to the minister directly to include some form or to put some form of protection of urban trees back into the resource management reform. I know the minister is working on that. I think it's part of the national planning framework. So I don't believe you'll see anything in these two bills, but there is work specifically being done around trees.
Sure. The main answer I wanted was there is nothing in these bills. And then the last question I'll raise, and in part it's directed to the Mayor if he is comfortable with addressing it. In a situation where this council might determine that what is proposed is unworkable for us, that the things that we already have in place are fit for purpose, well, not entirely fit for purpose, they could be enhanced. Is it conceivable that we might have some campaign to push back on this that might involve informing the public of Auckland as to the particular consequences, which, by the way, we have not done adequately for other reforms to date, including the present intensification that is occurring and Three Waters?
It's probably not appropriate to question the Mayor directly, but I'll take that as feedback to the Mayor and we can discuss offline throughout the committee. But we have, in part, through our submissions, supported the reforms because they are needed, but we have given strong feedback of our concerns, many of them that you have mentioned, and we can put those, if you put more feedback together as well, to send on to staff to ensure that's in the submission as well.
So, supplementary question. In a circumstance where the Mayor may have some concerns, but it may well be that a majority of councillors have some concerns, can we consider what level of pushback we have? That is the question that I'm asking. I don't need that asked now, but what I'm suggesting is a different circumstance to the one that has been in place so far, where the council just goes along meekly with all of these reforms on the part of government.
Yep.
We under-inform Aucklanders
Cool.
as to the consequence.
Councillor
So
Walker, yeah.
my apologies for
No, go.
making some points, but I think Aucklanders expect to see a different approach from this council.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman.
Good morning. With respect to the requirement for the regional planning committees, can I just understand the requirement for local government to be able to fund this? Are we dealing narrowly with the requirement for local government to fund the administrative secretariat role of these PCs, or is the interpretation of the requirement the ability of council to fund this beyond that, to fund the delivery of the planning and the infrastructure outcomes that might result as from a resolution of the RPCs in relation to the future spatial planning of cities and regions?
I think it's both actually. Auckland Council, as the host council, will be required to support the Regional Planning Committee, but also provide expertise and staffing resource to help the committee develop plans and strategies. But also through implementation, there is this requirement for council to include priority actions in the implementation plans and actually fund that through the long-term plan. But there were a whole range of other delivery partners like the private sector, infrastructure providers, and even central government. They'll be parties to the
No,
plan.
I just want to be clear about this. So the model here is that third parties will have a statutory role and voting rights on the RPCs, but third parties will be required to ensure that Auckland Council will fund the investment outcomes codified by the GPCs, but those third parties themselves will not be funders.
Can I just, through the chair, coming out, so for example, central government will be on these regional planning committees and iwi representatives. Coming out of that it's not mandated at this stage, but this could be a piece of feedback. It's not mandated that there would be like an investment proposal or plan coming out, so that those parties and or anyone else, there could be some kind of agreement about who will actually pay for these investments. So I'd be very interested in any feedback you and others may have around that proposal. It's not mandated yet.
You'll get it, but I just want to try and get as clear as I can at the moment that the requirement must ensure council can fund and deliver projects in the RSS. So this group, which will comprise unelected third-party entities and Crown, but those entities and Crown are not necessarily the funders to ensure implementation of what is proposed. That's correct?
Yes, that could be the situation.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, yep. Resume my right to speak.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. Mayor Wayne Brown.
First of all, apologies for being a bit late. I had a meeting with one of the CCOs. Sadly, I can speak planning, having had many years as a developer and engineer. I know that they're trying to make this simple, but there's a long history of things getting far more complicated the more simply they try to be. And in terms of Councillor Walker's suggestions, I'm the spokesperson for everybody, so I won't be doing anything until the council themselves have a strong position on that. What I would like to discuss is in the environmental limits and targets and the national planning framework, there are often, we will need to have vigilant work from our staff, that's you people, in watching this develop, because there's nothing worse than a well-intentioned bureaucrat helping everybody in terms of what can happen. And one of the things which has bedevilled areas of New Zealand has been national policy statements, NPSs, which just kind of arrive like bullets out of the sky that have a huge impact. And they will show up in the bit there that you had two little things. If you go back, one has got a picture of the environmental limits and targets. And the wording is wonderful: to protect human health and prevent degradation in the ecological integrity. Well, no one's going to feel bad about that. Intentions are good. Then they set in play national planning framework plans, and if you go down the next one, the national planning framework set out limits, and these limits are where the dangers lie, limits and targets, because the limits are often idiotic and have terrible consequences across whole sectors of society. There was an NPS that produced hail testing. Most people don't even know what it is, but it has a hazards activities industry list. And the good idea was that they would make sure that if you bought a piece of land that had a treatment plant for timber or soiled oil on it, that you would go through some testing to do that. That sounded fair enough. Then a group of them in a dark room in Wellington decided, they can have chemicals on orchards and farms. And so it was extended so that in certain areas of New Zealand, our rural parts of our city and all of Northland, unless you're building in a swamp or a forest, it has been an orchard or a farm. And so the people have to have these tests. And the tests are set at levels which, under testing, you can discover amazing things. We can now find single parts per million of arsenic. And so they set the levels without any input from geologists or other, and the level for arsenic is 65 parts per million. Now, even the word arsenic in parts per million, you all probably think, my God, that's dangerous. Most lawns would have 20 or 30 parts per million of arsenic in them. The level is at 65. If you exceed 65, you're supposed to dig the stuff up and put it in bags and cart it somewhere or other and hide it. We've found whole dairy farms with 2,600 parts per million of arsenic in them. And the cows are munching the grass and the people are drinking the milk and the cheese and no one cares. But people with 65 parts per million have to take all their grass away. And it's just an example of how nutty these things can be, because there is no perspective on what is a sensible figure. In order to hurt yourself with eating the dirt of 65 parts per million, you have to eat about 120 kilograms of it, which is probably going to make you sicker than the 65 parts per million of arsenic. But that is part of a law. And whole communities are now forced to go through an expensive set of tests of $2,500 a site for no benefit whatsoever. So I just use this as an example of how important it is that we run careful checking of everything. And I think that when we check things, I would like to see that we get some of the people from the other side, that is the developers, the people who are on the other side as well, who are supposedly going to help. When the governments are trying to help both sides, inevitably everyone gets hurt. And so I would like to see some people from the other side somewhere involved. What is their experience? I'd like to see that perhaps we had a mineral geologist checking some of these things, or if we have limits on something else, get somebody to check them. Because once they're in place, it's very hard to get rid of them. And the governments have known for years about the hail tests and that stuff. It just stays there forever, like a limpet. So I'm just giving, if you don't mind, Chairperson, just supporting the staff being rigorous in their reviews of these things and calling upon outside advice if you feel that you're not sure about these things, because they can cause a lot of damage. And that's it. I'm sorry to make a speech, but I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your appointment. I'd like to thank the officers for the clarity and the professionalism in the way that they have put this to us. It does set alarm bells going for me, and I think that the way in which you've captured the risks and mitigations is useful. But my question is to Megan Tyler, and that is, could you identify the numbers of pieces of legislation that have been passed in recent times where there is a separation of policy from funding? I'm sort of thinking of some examples where the government passes legislation with the expectation that council will fund it. So we had the Hauraki Golf Marine Park that the government didn't put any money into, but there was an expectation that the councils would meet those costs, and that was supposed to be Auckland's equivalent of a national park at the time, which would have been the only national park in New Zealand that was not funded by the government. We've had the Te Puna Manga Authority, where, while we welcome it, government absolved itself of any funding. It was then conferred. So there are a number of risks, but I'd like you to identify other pieces of legislation, because I think it's really quite important that in whatever submissions we make to government, we can draw on the experience where something might be well-intentioned, but is creating significant financial risk for Auckland Council. So can you, off the top of your head, or do you want to come back to me in a written form on that?
Through the chair, thanks, Councillor Fletcher. I'm happy to give a list, but the reality is, I think that every single piece of legislation that gets passed has a cost impact on councils, sorry, that relate to us,
Yeah.
and therefore there is an unfunded element to it that we have to find. And I know you all around this chamber, in whatever role you may have had previous to this council, will know that. And so I could give you a list, but I think it's really clear that both in these bills and things that have passed, there will be costs that we will not have, and so we will need to find. And then that comes down to where do we find the money. So whether that's really big infrastructure kind of investments, or it's administrative or new plans that need to be done, that we'll be asked to fund.
I support the Mayor in keeping that vigilance. Can you explain, Megan, who will oversee this work? Is this Jacques Victor that will be working on the submission, or is it yourself directly? We've got these wonderful officers here who obviously are all over it, but can you explain to me who will pull together, and I do congratulate the Chair for seeking an extension of time so that the matter can come back to this committee, but I'd like to know who will be working on it.
Thanks through the chair. So Karen and Amber will be pulling everything together. We have got people working on it already from across the group, so both council and our CCOs as well, with specific experience either at an operational level or in a technical sense, a little bit like the Mayor raised, certain technical elements might come in and expertise. So we have a range of staff across the whole group working on it. Amber and Karen will pull it together. Yes, they sit in Jacques' area, and which sits with me, and so I'll be the ultimate kind of overseer of that. But it involves all divisions and all parts of the council group.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think it was Councillor Darby who asked how much the cost of MPSUD was. I think that was about 3.5 million. I know MPS Freshwater's about 2.9 that we've been given in our budget document. So yes, the cost does pile on, and we do need to give that strong feedback back to government continuously. So I agree with you there. Member Ashby.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I just have one quick question, and that's assuming that this reform proceeds in some shape or manner, and there's a lot of water to go under the bridge, but what can Council be doing now to prepare itself and its iwi partners in terms of the implementation of it, bearing in mind, I guess, the capacity building element with iwi, where that's at the moment, and so is there any initial thinking in terms of if this goes ahead, how Council can work with iwi on that piece? Thank you.
I do know that central government has in its current budget and the next budget a lot of money to ensure participation by iwi and hapu, and also capacity building. Participation and capacity are the big ticket items, particularly for mana whenua. We are still trying to find out, because there's no clarity yet, about whether central government is going to support local government with the inclusion and participation for mana whenua at the implementation stage. So that's not known yet, but we will be chasing that up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Ashby. Councillor Turner.
Thank you. 3 of 4 questions already ticked off. Just the last one, just more. The better off funding, when we talked about that before, we talked about the fact there was a few strings attached. There's nothing impeding Council's full powered impact, response to this submission, like we don't have any obligations to support things or anything like that?
Through the chair, if I can answer that. So you're referring to the Three Waters Better Off funding. Yeah, this is a bill at the moment, and so no, there's no strings attached to what council can cover in its submission. Clearly, government would want us to talk about, you know, the content and what's in the bills. We can say anything we like about that. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to say, even though RMA has a terrible name, not because of the legislation itself, especially as it was originally conceived in 1991, but the way it's been managed and how it seems to impact more on applicants who are ordinary citizens rather than big corporates. But I certainly lament the discarding or the planned discarding of Section 5, the sustainability principle. I know that the original RMA was conceived and worked on by political architects, intellectuals like Sir Geoffrey Palmer and the Honourable Simon Upton. And in Section 5, it seems to me, which was the purpose and principles of that Act, too often was not really considered. And the democratic principle, not just the sustainability principle, which came out of the Brundtland Report, I think 1988, but the democratic principle in Section 5 in the goal of sustainability of cardinal importance has been people and communities, and all too often in RMA that was simply bypassed. May I congratulate you on the work you're doing, and I hope it doesn't spoil your Christmas holidays, because it's a huge ask. But may I, you've obviously need an extension of time. Is that because of the Christmas holidays and just the scale of work?
Through the chair, in this particular case, it's actually more about ensuring that this committee is able to see the submission and provide its feedback on it. We will work whenever we need to work, and unfortunately it probably will ruin some of the Christmas of some of my staff, but and the staff around the organisation, but it is actually about ensuring that this committee gets to sign it off, as opposed to having a delegated subcommittee or something, because the due date is the 30th of January, 31st of January.
Okay, and I think that's very sensible. I think it's a principle we need to also apply to the community as well as ourselves. Our operation and our convenience. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Back to Councillor... Oh, actually, Mike, do you mind if I go to other councillors first and come back to you, Councillor Newman? Councillor Philippine.
Kia koe te kaikara kia tēnei te mihi, kia koe motokara kia tēnei rā. So thank you, Richard, Chair. Morena korua to our ladies. Very quick fire questions. Is this agenda here about approving the staff drafting a submission so then we can actually put our input into this? That's the first question.
Yes, basically it's approval to go ahead and prepare the submission.
And is it correct in saying that the public will also have the opportunity to submit to this particular bill?
Yes, that's true. The 30th of January deadline is for the public as well to submit.
In regards to C up there, can you tell me how many previous submissions have been made in regards to this bill, please?
From a council perspective, we've made 3 quite extensive submissions over the years. As to the total number they received, I would need to go away and check that, sorry.
No, but the council, just supplement you, that the council itself have already put in submissions in regards to this particular bill, and that will have a part to play with our submission that we will be discussing next year?
Yes, council have made these submissions and has outlined quite a strong position. For example, it proposed that we use the existing planning committee as our regional planning committee and augment it with iwi representation and central government representation. But we thought it was opportune to give the new council an opportunity to look back over those positions and confirm them or come up with different positions.
Kia ora, and tēnā korua e te rangatira, Independent Māori Statutory Board, ngā mihi ki a korua. I reserve the right to speak, Chair. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor Philippine, thank you. Councillor Baker.
So just following on from that, I'm just aware that we're an hour into this meeting and we're sitting on the first agenda item, and we seem to be missing the purpose of it. And so section 63 or paragraph 63 and 64 set out the next steps, which include us having a workshop on the 1st of February and the ability for members to provide their information to the staff. I'm happy to move, Mr. Chair, so that we can actually move on and get on with it instead of having discussions that we will have on the 1st of February, no doubt.
Kia ora both. I have one last question from Councillor Newman, and then we'll move straight to that.
Well, thank you, Chair. I think it's always good to be able to ask questions. Can I just ask the officers, with respect to the development of the RSS and the NBE, so if, for example, there's a proposal from the Regional Planning Committee that will flood the Riverhead Forest for the purpose of building a dam, is that committee's requirement to ensure that Watercare, or whatever its successor may be, can fund that work?
It's a good question. I suppose one of the issues that's been flagged by bodies like Local Government New Zealand is what is the role of the new water service entities. We don't think that's been addressed within the bills, so that's something we may want to highlight in our submission. However, the bill does identify the infrastructure providers. They won't sit round the table on the Regional Planning Committee, but they will be consulted in the development of these implementation plans and their agreement secured, although it's not legally binding, these agreements.
Megan, you talked about that we're reaching out across the organisation. Has Watercare provided at an officer level any input as to what it thinks about its role and the functionality of this process? This is circular between the natural and built environment and the spatial it seems to be all very circular, and I'm wondering where do they sit in this, because at some point this entity needs to somehow agree something that can be funded by it, I assume. So what does it think about that?
Look, we've started conversations with them, and this is a big one because we've already started talking about that with the Three Waters reform, as well as how this links into this. So they are at the table, we're working with them. I wouldn't like to suggest that they have a particular position yet, but that's exactly what we want to bring back to you and work through and get any feedback you have on that as well.
Kia ora, Councillor, thank you. So we have a mover, Councillor Baker, a seconder, Deputy Chair Dalton. Would you like to speak to that, Councillor Baker?
No, I've already spoken. We just need to move on.
Thank you. Councillor Darby, did you have...
Yeah, just briefly speaking to this, because it does, these resolutions are asking the staff to start drafting a submission, and so it's fair to provide some feedback here. Look, I hear concerns, and mainly concerns here today, but I hope that we do dwell on the positives of this legislation pending, these two bills. There are a lot of positives in this, and I can't help but see that plan making is going to be significantly strengthened, and the consenting ability to drive a bus through plan making is reduced. That's how I do see it, and that has been a significant problem where the focus has been on, giving the applicant the opportunity to drive a bus through the plans by
mitigating the environmental effects. And this direction is more on the outcomes, the positive outcomes. And that's a really good thing for this city and a good thing for our country. There is much greater opportunity for public participation at the early stages in plan making. That's a good thing. There's much greater opportunity for Māori to be genuinely involved, deeply involved, and that's a good thing. So there are a lot of positives there. It's less adversarial as well. Don't we need to get away from that? Desperately. There's dispute resolution that is recommended. There's dispute resolution that is recommended to follow tikanga. Isn't that a good thing? So overall, I see it as a more holistic approach and a healthier approach in terms of planning and then implementing planning. There are a few issues around the edges, around the role of this planning committee versus the regional planning entities that are proposed. But overall, there are good things. You've got the water, land and air and built environment and natural environments finally looking like they're meshed and belong together rather than separated. So, Chair, I'm just hoping that our staff, prior to our workshop, dwell on some of the really positive things in these two bills and build off the positive parts of the submissions that we've already made and present that to us at our workshop in the new year.
Thank you, Councillor, for that really thorough and important contribution. And as you'll see, members, I forgot to ask the staff to step away from the table once we were in debate. We debate each other and through the chair, not the staff. So sorry about that, staff. Next up, we have Councillor Lee, who'd like a speaking slot.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, as discussed, I would like to move in addition a new D, and that is to extend the sorry, I'll rewind that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any other speakers to this? Councillor Newman, you did not. You said you reserved.
Well, look,
right.
Chair, I really want to commend the officers for the work that they're having to do, and sorry to them that's going to ruin their Christmas, it appears, Megan. But secondly, I don't know how on earth you can. I just don't know how the organisation can respond in such a tight time frame, given the nature of, and I don't really care about what other submissions have been written up previously. You have to deal with the technical application of a bill based on the information that you have at the time, and what's apparent, Chair, is that a bit like Three Waters, there's so much of this bill that's unknown in terms of its implementation, and implementation is a problem because the conversation has always been about how to get faster, better outcomes, but in reality, the application of the legislation in terms of how you implement it, it goes in the opposite direction. The one thing that I do think, Chair, that would be really, really helpful, I know that we like to have joined up submission making processes where the council family lodges its submission, but at that forthcoming workshop, I would be very keen to understand from Watercare as to how it would effectively implement this as an infrastructure provider. As well, I'd like to interrogate Watercare's understanding of how the design of this in terms of, if you have, for example, significant new growth in a given part of the region, what are the implications for Watercare in terms of its consented discharge? And secondly, what is Watercare's ability to fund the infrastructure that would presumably fall out of the decision making from this regional committee? Because it all just seems to be something which is quite opaque. I doubt very much that this has been thought through by officials in the Department of Internal Affairs. I know that ministers will have not a clue as to how they're going to do this. Maybe they'll entrench it, but they don't know what they're doing here. And it'd be very good if we could understand from Watercare as to what its view is, because I think that should form a major part of the submission work that we will undertake. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you, councillor. Right, that is the debate finished. All those in favour?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No, perfect, thank you. Thanks again to the staff. Oh, all, sorry, that was carried. I forgot to declare that, so sorry. Next up, item